Hey, everybody, we are back with another episode of Can't Stop Snapping, the official podcast of MarvelSnapZone.com. And it is that special week of the month. It is Patch Week. There is some good, there's some bad, there's some ugly. We're going to break it all down, share our thoughts. I am joined by returning guest and fellow Marvel Snap Zone contributor, Zombies Go Nom Nom. Zombies, thanks for being here.
Hey, how's it going? Happy to be back. Excited to talk about all the new stuff with the patch.
Yeah, there is a lot to unpack. It's one of those times where I'm like, okay, we're going to try to stick to that time limit, but we have lots of topics to cover. So we will dive right in, and we'll start with maybe the least juicy stuff. I don't want to diminish Howard the Duck, but we've got a lot to talk about with the patch. But we always like to start off with the new card.
Mm-hmm.
So the new card this week is Howard the Duck. It is a 1-cost, 2-power card with the text ongoing. Tap this to see the top card of your deck. In the last patch, last month when we got changes to Jubilee and America Chavez, they said, you know what, we have some cards that are going to interact with the top card of your deck, and so we're making these changes. We obviously got Iron Lad last week, we talked about on the podcast, and then Howard the Duck kind of feels like a natural partner with Iron Lad, and we talked about that a little bit last week, but obviously that, cards are not limited to being played with one other card. So want to turn it over to you first. General impressions. How are you feeling about Howard the Duck in Marvel Snap?
It's a cool design. Like I like the design of the card a lot, and it really threw me for a loop when it first popped up, because you see the word tap, and if you played any Magic before, you're like, wait, what exactly do they mean by this? And it's like, no, you're just tapping your screen because it's a phone game.
Can you imagine you click it and it turns sideways?
That's immediately what my mind went to, and it was really funny. But then I took a step back. I was like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. But yeah, Howard's kind of cool. I think Howard, I've said it a few times, I think he is a card that kind of suffers from the whole every card currently is costing 6,000 tokens, because I'd like to mess around with Howard, but I don't really want to do that at the initial pricing. It's the first card in a while I'm skipping on, and it's I could get it. I have the tokens for it, but I think he also suffers from being kind of wedged between two really anticipated releases of Iron Lad last week, and now the
High Evolutionary,
is coming next week. So it's kind of tough for Howard, and it's cool to want to do stuff with him and Iron Lad, and I've seen some people do that and have success. But like you mentioned, you don't really have to play these cards together. And I think you could even make an argument for your deck might just be better not running Howard. But there will be times where the information is very useful. I saw a few people talk about that. I thought it was an interesting point. I think if there's one Howard the Duck and Iron Lad deck that ends up kind of working really well with their synergy together, it might be a Galactus deck, because people already experimented with Lad and having him be another chance at Galactus, or maybe another chance at your ramp. But Howard does something really cool where the next card you're going to draw. So not only does that let you, plan your Iron Lad, but it just lets you plan your game plan a lot better. And so that was kind of a pretty convincing argument to me for especially decks that rely on ramp. So the Electro ramp style stuff, those lean very hard on their early ramp pieces. So Electro, Wave, some consider Jubilee is pseudo ramp. And if you don't get those cards, sometimes your deck is a little slow to get going because you have a handful of 5 drops and 6 drops, which isn't ideal. So knowing hey, I'm going to get my Electro on time or next turn, or my Wave or what have you, that information is really valuable. And I think he's going to end up being a little bit like Kang, where he helps you manage your cubes a lot better. Because if my opponent's snapping me and I'm not in a great position, but there's something that could bail me out, you can just click Howard and see, oh, am I going to draw that next turn? Oh, I'm not. All right, I can just get out for less cubes. Or, oh, do I know I'm going to draw Electro next turn on curve in my ramp deck? Well, I can snap early, so if they do end up leaving, if I'm doing powerful stuff, I get more cubes out of it. So that's been the most convincing argument for Howard to me, has been in just the information can be pretty valuable. And unlike Kang, you do actually get some stats on the board. It's not much, but it's a 1-drop. So what do you really expect? But it's a cool design, and I think people will have a lot of fun with it when he drops down and it becomes a bit more accessible.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people will be picking him up for 6,000 tokens, like you say. We'll be talking more about card accessibility and changes there as we go on the conversation. I think it's a great call out with the Galactus synergy, right? And Iron Lad. That's just very interesting to me because one, it gives you information on you got to draw Galactus, but if you also have Iron Lad in hand, like you can pull him out early without playing Wave the turn before or something like that, where it's a little more obvious to your opponent, right? I think that's really cool.
Yeah, the surprise factor.
Yeah. And so this idea that, like, you know, the ability to snap earlier more confidently, you know, I think is a good thing. It probably nets you more cubes over the long run, right? If you're snapping on turn 5, turn 6, a lot of people are going to retreat and it doesn't really do you that good. But if you're able to have that, just in those cases, maybe that one little piece of extra information, it may give you, you know, you can snap in 10, 20, 30% more of your games. Who knows, right? And that can make a difference over the long run. So interesting card for sure. You know, on the flip side, I've seen a lot of people say, you know, I've just read a lot of thoughts online. I asked people on Twitter, and people have said, you know, when we really look at it, it's not that helpful, right? Like it's more helpful to just play a 1-drop that does something that, like, you know, disrupts your opponent or gives you more power on the board, or kind of like you said, like maybe in some of these decks with Iron Lad, right? Like it's just better to have another card to Iron Lad, right?
Yeah, because if you hit a Howard off of your Lad, you're not. I don't think you're going to be that happy about it.
Yeah. It's like, well, yeah, I'm screwed. So interesting. I think I love the design space with this. I love this idea that you can kind of like click and interact with a card at any time to do something.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know if that's like necessary something they're going to do again.
Well, they kind of did it with Lad too, right? Because it's a
Yeah.
similar thing where you click and then you see behind the card. So I imagine that's something they'll probably do again, since we've seen it come up with both Lad and now Howard. I think that's how they're gonna maybe make. I don't want to call it like an activated ability, but it's kind of what it is. It's like you activate something on the card and you get to see
kind
what
of
it's
another
doing.
state. Yeah. So definitely could be. So I think Howard is interesting. Like you say, I think he suffers a little bit from the 6,000 tokens and being like Iron Lad. So many people have been excited about and been doing great stuff with. Seen a lot of play. High Evolutionary, whether it's good or not, you know, time will tell. I think there's a lot of potential there, but I think so many people are going to pick up High Evolutionary because it's a big bad, 6,000 tokens for a long time, and it just has so much possibility and flexibility, right?
Yeah, it's like one card for like 8 cards or whatever, right?
Yeah,
which
exactly.
Is always cool.
So like, yeah, best value, best bang for your buck for tokens. So yeah, I'm excited to try out Howard. I am going to buy High Evolutionary next week, so I'm saving the tokens for that. Not going to pick up Howard this week, but interested to see what people do with him, right, as time goes on. Let's continue on here. We do have a new location this week, and that is Milano. So Milano is it's another one of these great ones where it limits your playability on the board.
Everyone's favorite thing. Yeah.
Which again, Second Dinner has said, like, hey, yeah, we designed a lot of these, and maybe they won't do so many in the future, but obviously they have a backlog of these locations. But for the listeners, Milano on turn 5, or the text says turn 5 is the only turn cards can be played here. So I think that's interesting. Obviously, you know, there's the obvious synergy with the Guardians of the Galaxy cards, right? You know, it's very likely your opponent's going to play cards there, so you can throw out a Gamora, Star-Lord, and a Groot, things like that. That can be powerful. You know, maybe you're playing a move deck to be able to move cards into this location. You know, and it is just cards can be play there, so you can add cards there.
Yeah,
so
with like Doom or other ways
Squirrel
of playing.
Girl, yeah. Anything that's adding a card there. So kind of an interesting location. Obviously it's not. Well, I feel like we just keep getting these locations that are like Sanctum Sanctorum, but like you can kind of
with
play
extra steps. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts here? What are you seeing with Milano?
So, like everyone else, I'm a little over these. I think I'm a little bit less over them than like the average player because my favorite thing to play recently has been like lockdown stuff. So these are
Mm.
really fun when you're playing a lockdown deck because it kind of helps your goal. But even with that, like I'm definitely of the mind we've gotten way too many of these. They seem to think so too. I think there was a dev Q&A thing today where they flat out said, yeah, so like starting in June going forward, we don't have any more of these like super restrictive ones in the pipeline. So it's out. We're at the end of the tunnel. We're
Yeah.
seeing the light for better locations. I mean, I'm sure there's still going to be things that do make you want to consider certain cards versus other cards. That's kind of what makes the locations fun. But it sounds like a lot less of this. Well, you just can't play your cards here. Which is good because this does get a bit annoying, especially when they start combining with each other.
Oh
Like
yeah.
it's fine when Milano's the only one in a game. I haven't hated it as much as I thought I would. I had some fun with it, but admittedly, I was playing like a Guardians deck with Gamora, so it's kind of leaning into it. But Gamora felt really good for this one. Doom felt really good for this one. I thought I really wasn't going to enjoy playing the location, but I actually didn't mind it as much as I thought I was going to. I'll be happy to see a bit more variety because we've gotten so many of these and we're getting less locations than we did like initially, right? It's now 2 a month. So it feels like we're getting less new locations to dilute these ones. So they're happening more and more. And I mean, we even saw them nerf the appearance rate of some of the more frustrating ones the other week, which was great because I think being able to change something like that makes for better gameplay experience. The fact that they can kind of fine tune those numbers when they're saying, "Hey, maybe this is popping up a little bit too much."
Yeah.
Like it's kind of crazy that to me that Krakoa didn't have the same rate as Ego initially. Like I didn't, and that's one again. I didn't hate that one as much as many other people did, but I totally get it. And so I was
Yeah.
really surprised to see when they changed that. That's where it was initially at. It was a much higher appearance rate than the super rare one. So it's interesting. I don't mind it that much, but I won't be sad to see these overly restrictive ones go away for a while.
Yeah, agreed. And it does feel it's so weird. It's like we're getting less new locations. They try to slow that down, but then in doing so, it's like when it rolls around and we finally get one, it's kind of like, oh, another one that restricts my play. It's
Yep.
yeah, yeah. So it's kind of felt bad. But as you're talking, I have open in a tab the next season pass, which we won't go into detail here. I mean, we'll wait to June. We won't spoil it for anybody. You can go look at it on Marvel Snap Zone if you want. Um, but the locations look really fun next month. And I will
Yeah,
just
more interesting than this month's, I think
yeah,
for sure.
yeah, things you can kind of like play around and really lean into. So interesting for sure. Yeah, I'm interested to see just we've had this conversation before on the podcast, but at some point you get so many locations. I mean, it's slowing down. If you do two a month, that's only 24 a year, right?
Hmm.
24 new ones a year, which isn't that crazy, but like at some point, do you just keep like moving more into like the more rare pools, or do you ever like have one cycle through that they're like they don't show up at all for a certain period of time?
Yeah,
Like,
it's a good question. Do you ever essentially like rotate out locations? And I mean, at a certain point, maybe it's something you do consider because it can give when you have, I don't know, a lot more than we have now. We have, I think, like 120 or 130, somewhere in that ballpark, maybe a little less or a little more. But when you have that many, let's say, however long from now, there's double that or triple that, then maybe you can create kind of like a targeted experience for set amount of time where certain types of locations show up more. So you can kind of like what they do with hot locations, but it'd obviously have to be a little bit different than that. But I wouldn't be surprised if they experimented with something like that, like far down the line, but probably not anytime soon.
yeah, it'd be interesting while we're spitballing here. I'd love like a featured location, hot location, but it's like multiple locations that like synergize together, just for
That
like
could be cool too. Yeah.
and maybe it's in like a casual mode or something, maybe not on the ladder, because I could see also the negative there, right? Because of
Hmm.
something so good and you don't have the cards or things like that. But I think
Yeah,
it'd
it
be
could even be
interesting.
its own like mode, right? Like that could be like again, that's a good point. That not every I mean, we see it with the hot location now. Not everyone likes the hot location, featured location because it interferes with like the ladder experience. But if you had your own kind of side mode where you could mess with that on like a weekly basis basis or monthly or however long, but it's like kind of its own little mini game mode. It's still Snap, but some things are different with the locations. Kind of a neat design space to
Yeah,
explore potentially.
it'd be interesting. Like, what deck would you build if you knew it was the same 10 locations were going to be like
Hmm.
show up in every game, right? Like it was going to rotate only through 10 locations. You could really kind of do some interesting things you normally couldn't do, or build some kind of janky decks that would be fun to play with. So anyway, obviously we're just this is all just theorizing, but yeah, I'd be interested to see where they go from here with locations. Um, they've pulled back on them a little bit, but obviously it is a core function of Marvel Snap, and I think they could do something more in a casual mode that kind of maybe is the happy medium in some of these ways, right? Where
Yeah, I think people would love that. Any type of mode where people can just kind of play their cards with less stakes, I think would greatly improve the player experience. Even for people who mainly play ladder, sometimes you want to play the game, but let's say you're like close to that rank milestone and you're just not feeling like giving it your all. You just kind of want to mess around and relax or just clear out your quests very quickly. Having a mode like that, I think, would make people way just enjoy the game more and be less stressed about it, because the rank stress can be really real even when you like try to make it not a thing. And just having a way to enjoy the game without that, I think, would make a lot of people pretty happy.
Yeah, and as much as I'm excited for Conquest mode, probably 4 weeks from now,
Hmm.
would be the assumption. That is obviously kind of like another high pressure, high stakes mode. Like
Yeah,
you
it's like
have
more
to,
high stakes kind of.
yeah, it's like you have to progress to the next tier in that mode.
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, I think they've said, in previous kind of roadmap updates that like, yeah, casual mode, something we're figuring out, but it's obviously hasn't been their top priority. So hopefully at some point in the next few months, it's a priority. And obviously, I work as a product manager in software, so I always think, things are going to be easier, and then I have the developers tell me, oh, actually, that's more complicated to do than you think. Okay, I'll
Hmm.
stop bugging you. So, there may be some complications to it that they're just putting off to resolve later. But uh, I think we'll stop there with location. Before we move on to our next topics, we will do a quick ad break. Hey all, I wanted to take a quick moment to talk to you about MarvelSnapZone.com. Marvel Snap Zone is a one-stop shop for everything Marvel Snap on the internet. They have new articles nearly every day that cover deck building, strategy, card breakdowns, etc. They have a great collection tracker tool and a deck list builder that works off of that collection tracker so that you can know what decks you can build with your current card collection. They have guides and deck lists for all level of players and all collection level of players. Make sure to go to MarvelSnapZone.com and check it out now. Okay, we'll dive back in here. And before we bring the slides back up, because our next slide is the card changes, which everybody, we always try to spend a good amount of time talking about those. Want to talk about the general changes here. So Kitty Pryde is back in the game. We'll talk a little bit more about how her effect has been changed as we talk about the card updates. But Kitty Pryde is back in the game, so that's exciting. Everybody got Kitty for free if your account was active as of yesterday when the patch released. So unfortunately, if you started Marvel Snap today, you're not getting Kitty Pryde. But I think
Did
most
she just
people
show up in your collection, or did you have to go to like the little inbox? Because I already had Kitty, so I wasn't sure how
she
that
just showed
worked.
up. She was just
Okay.
there. Yeah, I was thinking. I was like, I didn't see anything in my inbox. I was like, oh, am I gonna have to wait like 6 hours or something
Hmm.
weird? And she was just
She was
there,
just there. Okay, that's
ready
cool.
to go. So, kind of similar. I think the same thing happened with Jane Foster back in the day with Nexus
Oh
events. It was
yeah,
kind of
that's right. Hmm.
just dropped her in everybody's collection. So that's something to note. Another thing to note is they've made a change to deck cosmetic customization. This is something we knew was coming. You can now kind of create a full loadout for your deck. So you can do card back, title, your user icon for a specific deck. So it's kind of like it's a way to leverage and use those titles and those
Hmm.
icons more. I haven't played around with it a ton, but I think it's a good quality of life change. I don't know if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, I was actually really hoping for something like this because, like you said, I have a million avatars and
Yeah,
I like doing theme decks or going around a certain theme. So if I can theme like the avatar and the title and the card back together, I'll do that. I think it's fun, but I'm not going to go out of my way to like do that every time I switch a deck. So being able to have it just saved on a deck is really cool, and I like
yeah,
that. I think the only downside with this feature is you should be able to set a default, so whenever you create a deck, it just gives you your default, and then you can kind of customize it from there per
mm,
deck. Because right now it just gives you the regular like shadow avatar, and I don't know if it gives you a title or if it just uses the one you use. But you have to like set it every time you make a deck now, or it won't really have anything. I think that's a little annoying.
that is a little
So that's
weird.
like but I think that's more of a minor oversight, and I think they'll probably change that over time so that it just uses your default and then you can change it if you want to change it. But like good feature overall, and it's something I was pretty happy to see. I didn't know we were getting that so soon, so that was pretty cool. And I'm actually using more of the avatars and titles that I mean, no one's really happy to get them most of the time, but at least I can use them a bit more now.
Yeah, I think that is a good thing. I mean, we all at this point have who knows how many,
A
right?
lot.
Of both. Haven't counted. But it's always like, oh, I change them both once a month, right? Or
Yep,
once
same. Or
every two
maybe a
months.
bundle I really like or something, and then
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
change it for a month. Yeah.
Get a new bundle. Oh yeah, I'll use this icon and I'll use this title, and then I don't really think about it. And so
Mhm.
now it's a little more built into, yeah, how can I like do something a little funny, make something a little theme so that my opponent sees it and is like, oh, I get it, or yeah, I get that. I don't know. I'd be interested. It's one of those times I'd like to be a fly on the wall and be able to see the statistics of like, all of a sudden are people like using this a ton, right?
Yeah.
Or is it only really increase people using more of they use two
Yeah, I
percent
do
more of
wonder
their
how
of
many
their
people do
cosmetics.
that. Yeah.
So, uh, be interesting to see. They could probably make it a little better, like you say. But let's move on to this next one. I think is a very interesting one, and we could probably have a whole conversation about this, but I'm interested in this change. So, ranked mode changes. So,
Mhm.
the number of cubes required to rank up has decreased from 10 cubes to 7 cubes. So,
Mhm.
previously, you had to get 10 cubes for each rank. Now you need 7. The number of bonus ranks gained when tiering up has been reduced from 5 ranks to 3 ranks. So, more recently, it's been, when you would reach rank 80, you'd actually go to 85. You'd get a 5 rank buffer. You kind of get 50 free cubes.
Mhm.
Um, Now you get 3 tiers, which is 3 times 7 cubes. So you get 21 free cubes, but then you only need to go 4 more. No, sorry, you still need to go the 7 ranks,
Mhm.
but it's 7 times 7, so that's
49
49.
cubes. Yeah.
So each rank, if you don't drop down at all, is only like one less cube
Mhm.
to rank up. But it is, I think, worthy to note that at the beginning of a season, when you drop down a full to like a 10 rank floor. So if you drop down from infinite, you go to 70. So you still have to climb 10 ranks at that point.
Mhm.
You have 30 cubes, right? Yeah, 30 cubes shaved off that you have to 30 less cubes to get to infinite.
Yeah,
There you go.
yeah. Yeah, they said when they did the first change they were gonna like mess around with this, try different things until they found like the sweet spot. I know like one complaint about this, like other people have had and I had was like, oh God, why'd it have to be 7? Like you couldn't just make it 8. So like it's just easier to, not even just doing the math, it just looks better when the cubes are in 1, 2, 4, and 8. It feels weird when I'm getting 8 cubes and it's like, oh, full rank and a bonus cube. And
Yeah.
but that's a super like minor nitpick. Clearly, this is to they want more. I think they want more people to like climb up the ladder than are currently. And I think this is just another slight push in that direction to make
Yep.
it a bit easier. I haven't noticed too much of a difference with it. I think I've climbed like a little bit faster than I would otherwise, but I was already done with like my initial climb when this came out. So I'll get to see more of that next month on reset. But from everything I've heard, it's like just a very slight bonus, but not drastically different from what we had before, which is already like an improvement. So seems fine, but the number bugs me because it doesn't evenly divide by like the cubes you can get.
Yeah, that is interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, but I can definitely see that. I think it's interesting. Now you can climb a full rank with an 8-cube win, right?
That's
It's like
true.
every time you get 8 cubes, you're guaranteed to get a rank, right? No matter where you are between ranks. So I think that's interesting. Maybe there's some, brain juices with that, right? It feels good, right? So like maybe it doesn't speed up the climb that much, but maybe there's kind of that piece where like you feel more motivated to keep going
Yeah, the
because
perception, and
you,
then
yeah, you
perception
feel,
can be reality for your players, right? Like if you perceive something is, happening a certain way, even if it's not happening as much as you think it does, it doesn't really matter as long as you're kind of perceiving it that way.
yeah. So that feel good of like, oh man, I got 4 cubes in it. Like, I got the rank, right? You need 2 4-cube wins to get a rank instead of 3, right? So it kind of like feels like, yeah, things are going faster. So again, not a bad thing. I think it's like you say, playing around with it, adjusting it. They're trying to pull the levers slowly over time to see what is going to help encourage more people to have fun, but also more people make it to infinite, a higher percentage, without just making it so, yeah, you just open the game and you make it to infinite, right?
Yeah.
They can't do too much to make it too easy,
They still
but
want it to be
also,
a challenge, right?
yep, they want it to be a challenge, but they want it to be accessible. So that's a hard kind of middle ground to find,
Yeah.
but they're working towards it. And yeah, I mean, I thought the people probably felt, had mixed feelings about when they changed it. So you got the 5 free ranks, right? People saying it's too easy now, but there's still a challenge, right? It's still a challenge for some players more than others. I'm not a player that makes it to infinite every season. I've made it to infinite, but I don't make it every season. But there are people that made it every season before and are going to make it a little quicker now, right? So you have to kind of look at it from the perspective of all players, right? And
Yeah, even if it doesn't affect you directly, it seems like a net positive for like the bigger part of the player base, because I think there's a ton of players who, I mean, you don't really hear from them because they're probably in a more casual group or setting and just playing the game on their phone and not really involved with any of the stuff going on online about the game.
yep,
Who that can have a pretty positive impact for. So it's good to remember that.
yeah. So interesting change. Didn't necessarily expect that one, but hey, more stuff to talk about. But let's dive in to the meat here, and that is, oh, and our faces disappeared for those watching. That is the card changes. Lot to talk about here. We did get kind of like whispers of a wave change in the last week or two. I saw some developer comments, but we'll get there in a second. Let's talk Kitty Pryde first. So we already said Kitty Pryde is back in the game. Everybody got her for free. Her text has changed from you can return this to your hand to gain +2 power, which in and of itself, before she released, people were like, how does this work? It wasn't super clear, but people kind of figured it out, but there were some bugs with that the developers pulled her from the game. So the new text, she retains the same stat line, is when this returns to your hand, +2 power returns at the start of each turn. So I think that's interesting. There's a couple nuances that like don't work differently. So maybe we can break those down. I think the first one being that, she's forced to go back to your hand if you have space in your hand. So like,
Yeah.
you can't leave her on the board because you want to like spend your energy on something else. That turn is like she's in your hand and you're not going to get that next buff on her unless you spend the 1 energy every turn to put her back on the board. And on turn 6, she's got to come back in your hand, which means if you want to play her down again, and if you haven't lowered her cost in any way,
Can't play a 6-drop. Yeah.
Can't play a 6-drop. So what other things do you think, or have you noticed that this kind of changes with Kitty Pryde?
So this is like a smaller thing, but so I played with Kitty a bunch before she ended up getting like removed. It was a short window, but it was like a day and a half or 2 days. And I really, really liked the card. Still really like the card. It's great. Everyone ended up getting her for free. I think it's unfortunate they had to rework it mainly because of the bugs and her interacting weirdly, because I think it was timing issues where there were other effects that would go off during that weird timing between turns.
Yep.
And that seemed to be causing the problems, and they couldn't reasonably fix those problems without a lot of other like deeper coding stuff. So decided to change the card a bit. Card is still really good. Like you mentioned, it does feel like a bit of a nerf in terms of you can't just choose to stop leveling up your kitty. Well, I guess actually you can, but it's a really fringe case scenario if you have a full hand. I had someone
Yeah.
do that to me yesterday where they used Moon Girl to fill their hand, and the kitty didn't bounce to their hand on turn 5.
Yep.
So they were able to play a 6-drop because the kitty bounces at the start of turn. So at the start of the turn, your hand is full, no kitty. So that was kind of interesting. Probably just going to be a fringe thing. I don't think that's going to be a major mechanic that people end up
Yep.
using with kitty, because the bounce deck usually doesn't keep a full hand, especially towards the end of the game. But it definitely seems to be performing really well still in bounce. I tried it out last night. I seen a bunch of other people having success with the card. It feels pretty much as good as it did before, but now you have Hit Monkey, so I feel like it got a bit of a boost from that, because Hit Monkey, along with Bast and Mysterio, definitely give the deck a bit of a boost. And with Hit Monkey being a pass card and Bast rotating down, it's more accessible than it was before, because before it was like, oh, you needed Bast, who is Series 4, you need Kitty, who is a new Series 5 card. And now it's actually a fairly budget deck. I think it's, aside from Hitmonkey on the pass, I think it's all pool 3 and below cards, which is that's great, because due to some other changes, some other budget options got a little hurt with this change, this update. So
Yeah.
it's nice to see. I'm glad Kitty's back. It's a shame it took so long to get her back, but at least they kind of compensated people in a good way, and now more people get to play with the card. So that's
Yeah.
great.
No, I think bounce has always had a place, right? We've seen people play bounce since the beta. I mean, in
Mm-hmm.
different forms. Obviously, more cards have been added to the game over time that have been kind of fit into that shell. But I think bounce is really kind of coming to its own, like you say, with Kitty Pryde, Hit Monkey, Bass dropping down. I think those are great things to call out. It's a much more accessible deck. For a while, it was kind of like, well, yeah, if you're Series 3 complete and you've picked up all these other cards in Series 4 and 5, like that's the best shell. So it was like
Mm-hmm.
content creators were playing it and people that played a lot were playing it, and but probably not accessible to like your casual player, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where now it's something that people can, they can go to marvelsnapzone.com or see somebody playing it online and they can pull the deck list and probably have most of the cards right off the bat. So interesting change. Glad that everybody's got Kitty, and excited to see more play with Kitty, right? It's kind of like we Kitty came out so long ago, it feels like now, but like Kitty's only been available to play like a total of like 4 days.
Yeah, it was like
like
no
that.
time at all to actually play with the card. And
Yeah.
man, the funniest thing I've seen with Kitty is the cloning vats. And oh my god, there are so many kitties. I think the game ended with like 7 or 8 kitties, and some of them were huge. Some of them were like 8. I think there was a 10. World's juiciest Killmonger opportunity right
Oh
there.
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh man, you're just holding that to turn 6. Just
Mm-hmm.
slap that down. Well, let's talk about our next card change, which is Crystal. This is one we've been predicting potentially to be part of one of the OTA patches. We said maybe we see a stat line change, but they've opted to go the route of reworking the ability on the card here. So Crystal's previous text was, on reveal, if this is in the middle location, shuffle your hand into your deck, draw 3 cards. So she was a 4 cost, so normally you're playing her on turn 4. So there was often you like had 3+ cards in your hand, and so you were like net losing a card, and it wasn't. Crystal was not really playable competitively,
No.
right? It never has been. They're the Crystal believers out there, and Crystal fans. I have like one of my favorite variants is a Crystal variant, and it's just sitting there, with the green border. But now Crystal has been changed with the same stat line to have the ability, on reveal, each player draws a card. So this is very interesting. I'll let you talk first. What do you think about this change? Where do you think it fits in?
I think it's a good change. I think Crystal goes from being a super unplayable card to a slightly unplayable card, but more like Fringe. I could think of a home or two. This card could at least be tried in now. I think it's really clear, and I think they even said it in like the dev comment that they want to be really careful about card draw because it's a 12 card deck game, and card draw can really make it more consistent in a way that might not be positive for the game because the variety is what keeps card games fresh a lot of the time, drawing different sequences of cards. So if you're always drawing your deck the same way, might get a little stale a little bit faster. I'm really glad they totally reworked this. I was a little worried they were going to leave in the if you played this in the middle or something, which I think that text line should just go. I think that if you want to use that kind of design space, I think at the least you need to make it where it's a effect that happens by default. But if, let's say, if there's upside and downside to the effect, kind of like with Quake or even with the old Crystal, I think it would have been way better if they made it so it activates on the left and right location. But if you play it in the middle, doesn't activate. Because then if you get a bad middle location, the odds are smaller that you get locked out of using your good ability because you have two chances instead of one. So that's how I've
It's
always
a
thought
great
they should
point.
like fix this kind of ability because it's just such an unplayable ability. It makes the cards so much worse. And we've seen kind of Quake suffer from that too, who is a less bad card because she's not understated and Crystal's understated. Like that's the other thing. She's a 4/4. You aren't really playing 4/4s.
No.
People take issue with like Drax being a 4/6 when he misses, and this is two below that. So it is the old version was rough. The new version, I mean, it's cool. I don't think it's going to see a lot of play, but I think some people are going to experiment with it in Galactus because that is the kind of combo deck that wants to be able to draw an extra card, and you don't really care if you're giving your opponent an extra card a lot of the time in that style of deck. And then stuff with like Ronin or Darkhawk and Master Mold, that kind of stuff. I think it's always going to be like the worst one of the Hawk options, but people really like it, and I don't think it's so much worse that it's like not good. It's probably fine because you're kind of coasting on the power of Zabu and Darkhawk a bit, where you can get away with playing these other cards that might otherwise not be as good without them. So that's kind of what I think with Crystal. I think she might pop up as an experiment in those places. And Galactus seems like the main home, at least in a version that's kind of like all in on going the Galactus route.
Yeah. One thing I've seen people say, again, I haven't necessarily seen this tested out. I was just watching some other content creators talk about this earlier today. Like maybe she fits in a shell where like you have like win con options with Ronin and Devil Dino, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because she buffs both of those for you essentially,
That's
right?
true. Mm-hmm.
So play Crystal on 4, but maybe before that you've played like Master Mold and you've played Agent Coulson and you've done other things to like increase the
Yeah.
cards in your opponent's hand and the cards in your hand, and then you're able to go 5-6 Ronin Dino or
Mm-hmm.
and you have Mystique obviously to like double one of them if one of them is going to be stronger, right? Things like
Yeah.
that. Um, Again, I don't know how good that is. I think that's just something people are gonna have to test out, and I may test it out myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that's an interesting space. I think the space you described with Galactus or something where a ramp where you're really wanting to kind of get certain cards pulled out and guaranteed to be in your hand when you need them is interesting. Obviously, being a 4 cost, we always say Zabu, right? You can get her
Mm-hmm.
out on 3. Um,
Yeah,
but
maybe you're okay paying 3 for this card.
yeah,
Maybe it's
yeah.
not so bad.
Um, so I guess just in conclusion, I think you said it well. Krista went from unplayable to maybe fits in a couple fringe builds of a couple decks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people can experiment with her. And important to note what the developer said, as you kind of spoke to. They don't want Crystal to be a good card, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't want Crystal to be like, oh, Crystal is OP. Everybody's playing Crystal, and everybody's drawing all the cards in their deck,
Yeah.
and they're just able to play their combo every game. That's not what they want. So I think that's fair. I think like Crystal's been so bad for so long, everybody's like, make Crystal good, right? And so maybe
Yeah.
this probably isn't the change everybody was expecting because everybody's had this feeling of like, we want all the worst cards to be good.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the developer comment of like, hey, this makes her better, but like she's not supposed to be good in
Yeah.
that sense, right? So anyway, we'll continue on. We could talk all day about Crystal, but the next two are the juicy ones in my mind.
Yeah.
Rest in peace, Death Wave. May 2022 to May 2023.
Yeah.
Wave still retains the same stat line: 3 cost, 3 power. The text went from on reveal next turn, cards in both players' hands cost 4, to on reveal, all cards cost 4 until the end of next turn. Wave's cost reduction occurs after other effects that reduce card costs. I don't know if that last piece of text is actually on the card or if that's just the
No, that's
note.
just like a clarifier,
That's
I
like
believe.
a developer
Yeah.
note they gave us. Yeah. So what this means is things that lower cost. We're talking like Miles,
Stature. Yeah.
Stature, She-Hulk, Death, all these things, right? That
hmm
has been this whole synergy, this whole deck style for so long, will no longer work with Wave, because those will all reduce their cost, and then Wave will overwrite them to all cost 4. So
hmm
basically, Wave is now a ramp into 1 card, which, that's what people were doing with Galactus, right? That's
hmm
a key Galactus thing, and you do it in a couple other decks. You ramp into Sandman, right? Things like
Yep.
that. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
So I think I summed it up the best I could with a meme, and it's the Office meme where they're holding up the pieces of paper, and it's like, corporate needs you to tell me the difference between this picture and this picture, and on one is Wave and the other one's Sandman, and so like Wave is now like pseudo Sandman because nothing is getting through it. So it's funny. You see so many people the day it comes out who are like, "Oh man, rip Wave. She's just you can't do the Death Wave stuff. You can't do the She-Hulk stuff." I don't know if Wave's gonna make the cut anymore outside of Galactus stuff or maybe some ramp builds, but I think this might have actually just made her better. It's really sad that it kills off. Mainly Death Wave. I think Doom Wave's actually going to be fine. It's just going to drop She-Hulk, which it was a cool interaction. And I loved the Death Wave deck. It was the deck I wanted to get forever, and I didn't buy the Wave Pass in the beta because I wasn't playing as much then. So I didn't get Death Wave for like a super long time. So by the time I finally got it, I was like super hyped because I always liked the Destroy archetype, and that was like clearly the way to go with it.
Yeah,
So I'm personally a little sad to see it go. But I do think the reasoning kind of makes sense because they have a lot of design space they can explore in Snap, but a very big part of it, which is like cost reduction mechanics, which I mean, look at like any card game, cost reduction is like a very core part of design for a lot of different cards and tons of different games. And it's a fun thing, like making something that normally costs a lot, making it cost a little. It's fun. That's why people like doing it, right? That's why everyone likes cheating out the big death. And you had the bonus of making your opponent usually only able to play like 1 card themselves. But they kind of even confirmed that testing it with like even just with the addition of the high evolutionary abomination, which functions similar to She-Hulk with the cost reduction. They said it was like ridiculously powerful, and I totally believe that. So I can kind of understand wanting to, instead of letting that, because like what they could have done is they didn't have to do this now. They could have done this, let's say, a month from now, and they could have let it run wild. But I think we're probably going to appreciate the fact that they didn't if it actually would have been as strong as it looked, because I think it would have been like super duper meta warping. They said it's more a change for future design space. And I think that's true and good because we're going to want more cost reduction stuff. And it's kind of rough when anytime you're designing any kind of cool cost reduction, you have to be like, oh, wait, does this just slot as another free card into the Wave deck? Because eventually it gets a little ridiculous. It was already, I mean, you remember when She-Hulk first came out, people were like, all right, this is getting a little ridiculous. Now they can
yeah,
do Death and She-Hulk and another card.
yeah. And you Moon Girl, and you get like doubles of them, and yeah,
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 well, I can understand why they wanted to keep it a bit under control, but it's interesting because Wave is still really, really good. And now she is better at locking out the opponent than she was previously. And I think this is actually going to kind of challenge the stature Miles deck a bit, because now that can't get through it,
Yeah.
which is a pretty big deal. Other She-Hulk decks can't get through it. She really is, like, if you play her on turn 5, she's like Sandman, but you get another 2 mana to do stuff with. You can slam down a Jeff or whatever else you have. So I think Wave is looking really powerful even after this change, but the way she is used is going to be a bit different. I think this actually boosts the ramp deck quite a bit, because now you can kind of lock people a bit with going these like Wave into Odin, or I saw someone talking about like a Zola. So you just keep getting the wave effect, so they can only play one card a turn. And when everyone's playing Kitty Pryde, and a lot of people are playing Kitty Pryde, turns out Wave is really, really good.
Yep. Yeah. Because then it automatically, it's forced to go back to your hand, and you can't like choose to pull it up and play it back down, things like that.
It hurts
So
Sarah and stuff too, because those decks, even though they were locked before, they could still play 2 cards. Now you only get the 1 card, which, like, that doesn't sound like it's a huge difference, but for a deck like Sarah that usually swings really hard off of like 1 card, like Shang-Chi or Enchantress, actually can make a pretty huge difference.
well, I think it's one of those things we've always talked about on the podcast when we get patches or the OTA updates. Like, Sarah has gone so long without like having any kind of change, and Sarah has constantly been in powerful decks at the seeing the most play. So this, in some ways, is like it's a better counter to Sarah. So maybe Sarah can stay the same because now you can play better around Sarah, right? You could, like you say, Wave turn 5 is looking pretty nice, right? Locking your opponent out from having that big turn on turn 6. But like you say, you put down a good 2-drop, you put down a Lizard, or you put down a Jeff with Wave on turn 5, and then all of a sudden you can move your Jeff across the board, and
it's very flexible.
Or you can play your Lizard and know they're not going to be able to put 4 cards down at a location, right? Things like that, and then you do whatever you're going to do on turn 6. So interesting for sure. We're running short on time, so I do want to talk about the change to death, which isn't that big of a change. But with this, they're like, okay, yeah, we get it. This is going to make death not as good because you're not going to be able to do these kind of cheater out this combo. So they're lowering death's cost from 9 to 8. But I believe they said in the developer's comment, they'll look to see like, okay, if death just like sees no play from this point on, like they'll look at her again and maybe adjust the stat line further, right?
Yeah, like they acknowledge that this is a pretty big hit to her, so they're going to do this to start and see how things are performing, and if she isn't really performing very well, then they'll probably adjust it some more, which is nice to see. I don't think this changes a whole lot. I saw a few Destroy decks, and some were still able to play their death out, but I haven't really tried Destroy after the change myself. They did get that buffed Venom recently, so some people are still trying it, and maybe it still works, but only time will tell. But it makes sense. They're trying to make death a bit more reasonable to reduce, because now you no longer have to factor in the cheating her out as easily with Wave.
Yeah. So overall, interesting changes here. Only 4 cards changed, and one of them being Kitty Pryde, which we kind of already knew was coming and was going to be changed. So kind of feels like an OTA patch, one of the OTA patches in that sense. Like,
yeah, a little smaller in scope overall.
A little smaller in scope, but obviously text changes instead of just stat line changes. So,
but yeah, that wave change is like, I think, more impactful than a few of the other OTAs combined. Just the wave change on her own, I think, is going to be pretty significant for the game.
I mean, people who, if that's what they were exclusively playing, right? Wave type decks, like they have to figure out they're going to shift. The meta's going to shift accordingly with people trying a lot of different things. So we will continue our last topic here. We've got a few minutes left. But this is also kind of a juicy topic. So,
so we
got our series drop, which, I saw people chatting over the last few days, like, hey, they haven't told us like the series drop. Normally they tell us that before the patch comes out. That's a little weird. But I didn't really think anything of it. I said, oh yeah, maybe they're behind. Maybe they're really busy. But I think now we know why they didn't tell us. So dropping from Series 4 to 3, we've got Surfer, Sauron, Dazzler, Sentry, Ghost, and Shadow King. So that's more cards than we normally get from 4 to 3. And from 5 to 4, we got Negasonic, Teenage Warhead, Master Mold, and Nimrod. Do you notice any cards missing from here?
Yeah, I think I do. I think there's a Darkhawk and a Null missing.
Oh, that's weird.
From,
I thought
I
expected, yeah. So I expected those ones to come this month.
A
Anyway.
lot of people did.
Yeah. So everybody's been able to predict until now, like, okay, they've all been following the same cadence. They stay in Series 5 for the same amount of time. Then they go to Series 4 for the same amount of time. So it's kind of like we've been able to basically create a calendar of like, hey, this is when we know cards are going to drop. So if it's worth it to you, spend the tokens now. If you want it kind of medium cost, get it here. And if you want to wait all the way till Series 3, you're going to wait this much time. Which, there's complaints about, all cards entering Series 5. But, at least you kind of knew, okay, this is my time frame for getting this card if I want to wait.
Yeah, like I get this for free after X date if I'm Series 3 complete, which is a lot of people really valued that information. It a lot of players weren't buying all these cards as they were dropping. And either if they really wanted one, maybe they get it as it drops to 4, but a lot of people were waiting for Series 3. And that's why we've seen a lot of blowback about this in the community, because not only for moving these and kind of saying, hey, they're going to stick around in Pool 4, I think that itself isn't just the one thing that kind of rubs people the wrong way, though that's part of it. It's this, well, we're just going to choose what we want to stay in Series 4, and it'll drop whenever we feel like it. And it's just like, what does that mean? How, like, people liked being able to plan around this. And I think one line I can't believe they put it in the patch notes. Like, I actually did like a double take when I saw it, was they said something about how, yeah, in some months, if the meta's feeling healthy, we might skip on a series drop. I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, how can you determine if a meta is healthy when a lot of the player base doesn't have access to relevant cards? Like, if anything, that's like the opposite. So it's just it was a very frustrating thing. And like, I think they knew people weren't going to be happy about this, which is why they delayed they didn't tell us the series drop stuff before. And I kind of guessed this like the night before. I said, I wonder if it's because they're changing something, because they said they were going to do changes with card acquisition. And the really rough thing with this is they announced something really positive with it, but because of these other changes, that's what's getting the focus, because they kind of just messed with people's expectations. And this is just after we finally saw how long it takes a card to rotate to Series 3, right? Like, wasn't last month the first batch finally making its way down? Wasn't that April? Where Bast and all the other ones moved down, and everyone's like, oh, this is great. We finally know how long it takes for the cards to move all the way down. And now that's all out the window.
Yeah.
But the positive thing is that not all cards are going to be dropping in Series 5 anymore. They said 2 cards for June are not going to start in Series 5. We don't know what those 2 cards are, but that's a pretty big thing, because that's what people have been asking for. Is we don't want like Howard the Duck to be a 6,000 token card. If you drop him at Pool 4, I think more people would probably experiment with Howard. So that was like a huge win, but it was so overshadowed by the fact that I don't think the player base, or at least like the very engaged player base who engages online with the community and content and all the other stuff, I think there's just like a lack of trust that they're going to drop the cards in a reasonable time frame, especially when the cards they're conveniently holding back in Pool 4 are very meta relevant cards. Darkhawk's like at the top right now, and so instead of Darkhawk, it's like, oh boy, I got Sauron, Dazzler, and Ghost and Shadow King early. There's a whole lot I can do with that compared to Darkhawk, where you can make like 8 different decks with it. So and then Null too, which even though he's less popular than Darkhawk, he has a very specific place in the Galactus deck. He makes a big impact there. And I think some people are going to experiment with him now in Destroy decks, as those look to take a different angle. But this was just really frustrating. And it's such a shame, because if they didn't do this, or if they did this in a less like, I guess, offensive way to the community, where it's just like, yeah, we're going to choose and there's no timetable, I think people would have been really happy about this news, because there was some really great news. But it feels like every time there's a change to card acquisition stuff, there's always like bad that's coming with the good, and it's so easy for the bad to overshadow it. And I'm just like, how don't they realize this? Like stop putting these together. Like if you want to make a change with it, like sure, but like it just seems like such a colossal misstep to put these in the same thing, and doing it in the way that they're doing it, where you just have no time frame. You don't know. People already had a hard time deciding to spend their tokens. And yeah, they talked about there are a few little bonus ways you can earn a little bit more. We don't have specifics on that, so I'm not going to focus on that very much or factor it in. That's kind of a wait and see thing. Um, but it's people were very apprehensive to spend their tokens because they would generate, like, you'd have tokens in the reserve. And you're like, well, if I'm going to get this card after a couple months, I don't need to buy this right away. I want to make sure I get the most value for them. I think people are going to be even more likely to hoard tokens now because they don't know. Like, they don't know, man, what if Howard the Duck is one of those cards they pick? Well, instead of going from 5 to 4, he goes to 5 to 3. And then all of a sudden, the people who paid 6K for him are like, wait, what the heck's going on here? I paid a lot for this card, and now but it's great that more people are going to get it, but it's going to make people apprehensive because they don't know. Before we could look and we knew, you knew what you were getting for the tokens you paid. You knew, hey, I'm buying this card for 6K or 3K. Yeah, I'm overpaying by X thousand amount of tokens, but I get this early access period before the card becomes quote unquote free. And now we don't know that anymore.
Yeah.
And especially if they're picking and choosing based on the cards that are more sought after, that just feels really bad and definitely brings this kind of pay to win sentiment where they want you to pay more for cards that are better in the game. And that feels super not good.
Yeah. We're running short on time here, but I want to read part of the quote you referenced. It says, we may even skip a month series drop entirely when the meta looks fun and healthy.
I can't believe they said that.
These decisions will be made on a card by card basis based on data and player feedback instead of applying a blanket rule to all cards. So like, what does that rate to us with like the cards that dropped of like, what is the data and the player feedback is like, oh, players play with these cards a lot and they're better than these cards. I guess they're going to be more expensive for longer. Like that.
And they will drop. I've seen a lot of people ask that question. Oh, does this mean Darkhawk's permanently Series 4? No, they said they're not permanently putting these cards here, but we do not know when they're going to drop. It could be next month. It could be 3 months from now. We will not know until they decide to tell us, which people really, I do not think
bad.
like that feeling of they just want to know. They want to know when they can get the card because that's how they're calculating if spending my tokens is worth it. And when you remove the kind of part of that equation with the big question mark, I think you're legitimately going to see less people spend tokens with this change, which is the complete opposite of the intention of the change, which is, hey, we want people to buy more new cards. So I think they're really going to have to retool or walk this back in the next month or two or find something to do it differently, because I think this is a very big red flag for a lot of people.
Yep. I think the Second Dinner does a really good job of taking negative feedback and listening, and they've done that in the past. So I think they're hearing that now, and my anticipation is the same as yours. I think people are going to buy less cards and there was already decision paralysis, purchase paralysis, and that's just going to increase now because even a simple case where Master Mold's now Series 4, I'm like, well, is he going to be in Series 4 for like multiple months, or is he going to drop to Series 3 because I want Master Mold, but if I can save couple thousand tokens and maybe he's going to be Series 3 next month, hey, like maybe I'll wait and I'll buy.
That's a new card in June, right? If they're dropping a card at Series 4. So yeah, it really does add to that decision paralysis, which is such a shame because more people should want to get like the new cards, and I think they understand that's something they want too. They don't want like 5 people buying Jeff the Duck. All right. So they want more people getting these cards and playing with these cards, but this doesn't seem. It is worth mentioning that Pool 4 is way more accessible than Pool 3, and that's great and all. But the big thing that feels bad here is the fact that we don't know how long it's going to be in the pool, and the fact that it feels like they're going out of their way to select cards kind of based on power, which it's kind of against what they originally advertised the game as. Their whole kind of pitch was, yeah, you can you can play a fun card game without having to worry about paying for power. And it feels like that is not kind of aligning with the direction we're seeing Snap take in this patch, which is unfortunate. And I really hope that they kind of take that criticism and change stuff with this, because from myself and like just tons of other content creators, I think we all have the same kind of concerns about this, and we have the same kind of concerns as the player base. Like, I'm not individually affected by this change very much, but on principle, it really bothers me because I want more people to play with the cards, because I think that makes for a better game and a better experience. And when these type of changes are happening and it's going to cause players to maybe not even buy cards as much, it's like, it's pretty concerning. It's pretty concerning.
Yep. Well, on that note of concern, but also hope for a better tomorrow, we are out of time. And I appreciate you joining, because, again, a lot of big topics we covered today. And we'll anticipate listening to hear what the listeners' thoughts are on this when the episode comes out. But before we go, Zombies, I just want to give you a chance for you to give a shout out where people can find you, Marvel Snap Zone, podcast, everything.
Yeah. So if you don't know me, I'm Zombies. I do Snap content here on YouTube and on Twitch. Actually just started doing some content here on the Snap Zone YouTube channel, doing some features on the articles. So the Theorycraft decks, the tier list. We ended up taking a break from the video tier list this week because it came out right as we got the patch. A little bit unfortunate timing. But that'll be back next week, so stay tuned for that. And of course, the Infinite decks of the week. If you make it to Infinite and you want your deck to have a chance to be shared, you should definitely, I think, either go through the Snap Zone Discord or tweet out to Snap Zone, or even me. My Twitter is the same as my name here, Zombies Go Nom Nom. And then you'll have a chance of getting your deck featured on the show. I really love doing that. It's super fun seeing all the cool stuff people make it to Infinite with every week. So that's probably my favorite thing to do for the content here on Snap Zone. My content, I definitely do a lot of Snap stuff. It's my main focus, trying to stream that a bit more. And we do a Snap podcast every other Saturday. That is Born to Be Cosmo. We're going to be airing this Saturday. And it should be a good time. I have a feeling it's going to be a pretty long one because, as we saw here, the time just flew away because there's so much stuff to talk about with this patch. It was a really big update, a lot of stuff surrounding that. So if you want to hear some more thoughts about the patch and all the other stuff, check out Born to Be Cosmo. You can find that on YouTube, Twitter, etc. And yeah, that is about it for me.
Awesome. Well, Zombies, thank you again for being here. We love having you on the show. Listeners, as always, thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode. Can't Stop Snapping is a podcast written, recorded, produced, and hosted by Michael Thurman. Thanks for listening.